Well, good morning. Great to see everybody here today. It is a wonderful Lord's Day, isn't it? God has truly blessed us in so many ways. We cannot even begin to count the blessings in our lives. We start with Jesus Christ himself, and his church is an incredible blessing, and all the members of that church and the fellowship that we share, the ability that we have to come together as an assembly of believers and worship God. These are such incredible blessings. Let us never, ever take them for granted. I want to talk about an old phrase today, and I believe it comes from an Alexander Pope poem. The old phrase is, "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread." I remember the first time that I ever encountered that phrase was when I was very young. My dad signed up to do one of those 200-mile multi-stage relay races up in Oregon, where you run a little while and then you uncomfortably sleep in the back seat of a car and then you get to run a little bit more again. Rebecca and I have done several of those, and the t-shirt that my dad got, I was very young when he did it, but I remember the t-shirt that he got from that race it had a picture of the race on it. It said, "Fools rush in." Fools rush into running marathons. Fools rush into running 200-mile relay races. Fools rush into relationships, or they rush out of relationships over some of the smallest things. I want to talk about this concept of fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Let's start in the book of Jude. Here's an example of it here, and we're going to go through several different examples before we go and make some application. But if you take a look at the book of Jude, it only has one chapter. It's the penultimate book of the New Testament, so it should be easy to find right before Revelation. In Jude, pick up here in verse 7, and it's talking about judgments that God has brought and how we need to fear God for the power that he has in judgment. And he makes a couple of examples here before he gets to angels. That he says in verse 7 of Jude, "Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they are in the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh, are exhibited as an example in undergoing punishment of eternal fire. Yet in the same manner, these men also, by dreaming, defile the flesh and reject authority," underline that, reject authority, "and revile angelic majesties. But Michael the archangel," who we really don't know a lot about in the Bible, and yet Jude mentions him, "But Michael the archangel, when he disputed with the devil and argued about the body of Moses, did not dare pronounce a railing judgment against him, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" I love that even angels who are these powerful supernatural beings, the exact powers of which we really don't fully understand, but even angels understand there's a line that they don't cross. Yeah, they can show up and they can kill Assyrian armies by the hundreds of thousands. They can take fiery swords and protect the entrance of the Garden of Eden. Even angels who are that powerful know that there are certain things that they can't do. And one of the things they will never do, that they refuse to do, that they know there's punishment that comes along with it, is disrespecting God's authority. And yet, even though the angels know that, angels fear to tread on God's authority. Yet it does say in verse 10, "But these men revile the things which they do not understand, and the things which they know by instinct, like unreasoning animals. By these things they are destroyed. Woe to them!" And I'm not sure if this was the inspiration for that poem that was written so long ago, but you have an interesting example of literally something that an angel would refuse to do, where an angel like Michael the archangel says, "That's not my job to pronounce a judgment on you. That's not my job. And I'm not going to violate God's authority." But then these men who Jude is talking about, these disrespectful people, these people who don't regard authority, these people who just walk and tread over anything they want, they'll go and do things that even Michael the archangel refuses to do. Let me give you another example. We'll get a little deeper here. In Numbers chapter 16. There's an example of someone and his followers that they decided to take some action. They took action where action was not required of them. They rushed into something where an angel would fear to tread. If you go to the Old Testament, the book of Numbers, Numbers chapter 16, and it's interesting, almost as if out of nowhere, right? The first part of Numbers is it's a lot of rules, it's a lot of reiterating things that have already been talked about in Exodus as far as rules and moral commandments. It's following the Israelites during their 40 years of wilderness wanderings. And then it's just like in chapter 16, verse 1, all the tension that's been built up in Israel, they're hungry, they're thirsty, they don't get what they want, they whine and they complain, and there's this simmering tension, and it just blows up all of a sudden. And the match for all of this, the flashpoint, is Korah. So in Numbers chapter 16, it says in verse 1, "Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, the sons of Reuben, took action." Underline that. I want to talk about that in just a moment when we get to our next slide. "Now they rose up before Moses together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown." Underline that one also, because I want to talk about that. Men of renown. And you know what their problem was? They confront Moses and Aaron, and they say, "We feel like you're running this thing like a dictatorship. You realize, Moses and Aaron, that you've gone too far. We're all holy. God said so. Remember at Mount Sinai? He said we're his holy people, his royal priesthood, a people for his own possession. And yet, Moses, you and Aaron run this whole show like you're just the dictators of it all. We're all holy before the Lord, and you need to chill out, Moses and Aaron." Now, Moses is real broken up about this. I mean, it hurt him to the core, because if there was anybody in the world who was not in it for glory or personal aggrandizement or anything, it was Moses, who's called the most holy man who ever lived. He wasn't in it to be a control freak. He wasn't in it for the power. He wasn't in it for himself. That's the last thing that he cared about. If he was in it for himself, he would have quit a long time ago. And so he's very broken up about this. So he tells Korah, all right, fine. You've been giving me nothing but trouble this whole time we've been out in the wilderness. You complain, you whine, fine. You want to take my spot? You want to put me in my place? Then tomorrow, we'll get some censers, we'll put some incense in it, and we'll lay it out before God. And God will go ahead and pick who he wants to be holy before him. Fine. So they do that. And they get some censers, and they get some holy incense, and they put the incense in it. And lo and behold, God speaks from the heavens and says, "Moses, stand back." And it's never a good idea, right? It's never a good idea that when God says stand back, never a good idea to be the one in the middle of the room holding an incense censer when you're not supposed to be. And God opens up the earth beneath Korah and his followers, all 250 of them, and swallows them up in the ground. Now let's talk a little bit about this. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Moses was a humble enough man that he always was careful around God. He spoke humbly before God. Anytime he asked something of God, he was always very contrite about it. He was always very careful about, God, if it's okay with you, if it's with your permission, may I do this? Are we going to do this? Will you answer this question for me? But here's Korah just bursting in and saying, we're all holy. And I think his big problem was there was this clear division. You got Moses and Aaron up there running the show. Then you've got the priesthood below that, this special class of people. And I find it ironic that Korah, of all people, would have a problem. Because where does Korah's family line run through? Kohath and Levi? That means that Korah himself got to do things in the tabernacle. That his family actually was involved in the tabernacle. And God even points that out and says, are you not satisfied with what I've offered to you? Are you not satisfied with the place that I've given to you, the job that I've offered to you? He says in verse 13, he says later on in that, Are you not satisfied? Would you like the priesthood also, is essentially what God says. You want the priesthood in addition to everything else? So it's a little bit funny that of all people, Korah would be complaining about not getting special privileges since he himself seemed to have special privileges. And the big danger here that we see is they took action, it said in verse 1. I think that's a very interesting phrase. They took action. Did they need to? Was it necessary? Was anybody asking, was God saying someone needs to get up and do something about Moses and Aaron? No. All right, here's what happens. Practically speaking, I think that we're wired oftentimes to want chaos and drama. Now, you'll argue and say, no, that's the lie. I don't want any drama. I don't want any chaos. I don't know what it is about people. I think just people in general, when life is going really well and things are running smoothly, why is it that when life seems to be running really well and things are running smoothly, that somebody always has to bring something up? It's like it is the church. The church, just finally things kind of calm down in the church. And then something's got to blow up again. Your family, you finally get through like a big family drama and you go, all right, we can finally breathe. That was uncomfortable. That was hard on everybody. It strained our relationships. Let's not do that again. And then someone in the family says, I think we'll do that again. Why is it that people are wired like that when everything's running fine and everything's running smoothly, but someone's got to take action? Korah shows up and says, someone's got to do something about a problem that nobody knew was a problem before, but I'm going to make a problem out of it so that I can fix it. Be very careful that when God offers you by His providence a chance to take a deep breath and relax, don't create problems for yourself. In marriage, in raising your kids, in your community, especially in the church. Don't create fresh problems just because you're not used to peace and quiet. And it's like there are people out there, and I think probably all of us at some point have been guilty of it, but there are people out there who just cannot, like Korah, they just cannot accept things like God's authority, like Moses' authority, like Aaron's authority, like the job that God gave them that they're not happy about. And I wish I could do something else. I don't want to do something with the tabernacle. I want to do the incense. I don't feel like doing the incense anymore. I want to become a priest now. I don't feel like being a priest anymore. It's too much work. Let me go do the tabernacle stuff again. And they're just always unsatisfied with whatever life is at that time. The next verse talks about them being men of renown. These are important people from Israel. Do you think God cares that they're men of renown? Do you think Korah and his 250 friends come and say, that's it, Moses and Aaron, we've had enough of you? All the important people in Israel agree. Do you think God went, oh, Korah, oh, I didn't realize that was Korah who said that. Well, I'm going to have to really rethink some things right now. I think we generate a greater sense of self-importance for ourselves than what is truly warranted. And I don't think that God really cares that it's men of renown. Oh, men of renown. And listen, there are phrases that we say. I've been a member of this church for 40 years. Oh. You will not believe how big of a check I write to this church. In fact, my check is so big that I'm half tempted to do one of those great big novelty charity checks every Sunday. Oh. You know, my granddaddy was a gospel preacher. Oh. Men of renown. Well, if you're wrong, you're wrong, and it doesn't matter if you're a man of renown. If you're being a dummy, it doesn't care what your heritage is or what your lineage is. Being a dummy is being a dummy. And when fools rush in where angels fear to tread, God is going to call that out. He doesn't care that it's Korah who can trace his lineage back. Look, I'm Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, of the sons of Levi. Like, oh, really? Well, then I guess you can tread upon God's authority. I didn't realize that such an important so-and-so was here. And listen, the most galling thing about this story is what Korah says to Moses. In verse 3, you have gone far enough, Moses. Like, what? Moses has gone far enough? Moses had to have his arm twisted to even do this job. And you're saying that Moses has gone far enough? All he has done is practically starve himself and run his feet ragged going up and down Mount Sinai over and over and over and over again to bring the law down to you. That when the people of Israel are hungry, Moses is hungry. When the people of Israel are thirsty, Moses is thirsty. When the people of Israel are acting like fools and God wants to destroy them on the spot, it's Moses who stands between them and says, no, Lord, but for your holy name's sake, show them mercy right now. And Korah has the gall to say, Moses, you've gone far enough. Perhaps it's people like Korah and his friends that need to take a look in the mirror. They say, for all the congregation are holy. Sounds an awful lot like a good reason to reject Moses and his authority, right? Well, it only sounds like a good reason. And listen, sometimes things sound like a good reason. I mean, it's couched in this like religious language. Like, listen, all of Israel, we're all holy before the Lord. Okay, that's true. But that doesn't mean that everybody's going to have the same job or the same set of talents or is called to do the same thing that God calls one person or another to do. We are all holy before the Lord, but that doesn't mean that we get to tread upon God's authority and get my own way. Just because I am holy before the Lord doesn't mean that I'm going to be given every talent. And when jealousy and envy and pride and self-promotion get in the way, you end up looking a lot like Korah, parading around your holiness. I am holy. God says everybody is holy. Therefore, I get to do whatever I want. No, Korah, it does not work that way. We need to be careful not to be men of renown who take unnecessary action and accuse God's people and God's servants of going too far when it is our own hypocrisy that should be what we look at in the mirror. Okay, let me give you one other example before I make some practical application here. So we got Jude and the angels versus the ones who reject God's authority in Jude. We've got Korah and his followers in Numbers 16. Well, what about 1 Samuel chapter 13? In 1 Samuel chapter 13. Now, we don't have time to read the whole story, of course, but we'll give a little summary of it here. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, Saul is king over Israel, and he's there realizing that he's in kind of a tough spot. If you go back a little bit in the chapter to verse 4, the Philistines assembled to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people like the sand which is on the seashore in abundance, and they came up and camped in Michmash, east of Bethaven. And when the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were hard pressed, they hid themselves in caves and thickets and cliffs and cellars and in pits. And there's Saul in verse 7. Saul was in Gilgal, and all the people were following him, but trembling. He knew he was in a rough spot. And if only Samuel the great prophet, Samuel the judge, Samuel who has led Israel into battle in the past, if only Samuel was here on time, we might be able to rally Israel and go fight these Philistines the way we're supposed to. But because Samuel's delaying, I guess it's up to me. I guess I've got to do everything here. I got to be king, I got to be general, and now I've even got to be a priest before God and start offering some sacrifices. And when he waited 7 days, which, in fairness to Saul, probably seemed like a really long time to wait for Samuel to get there, according to the appointed time set by Samuel, but Samuel didn't come. And the people were scattering. And so Saul said in verse 9, "Bring to me the burnt offering and the peace offerings." And he offered the burnt offering. And it came about in verse 10, as soon as he finished offering the burnt offering, that behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him and to greet him. And Samuel said, "What have you done?" Saul knew he was in trouble because he was not allowed to offer those sacrifices. It was impetuous of him. It was foolish of him. He, like a fool, rushed in where angels feared to tread. He made assumptions and he thought his reasons were fine. He even says, "Well, because I saw that the people were scattering and that you didn't come in the appointed time and the Philistines were assembling at Michmash. So I said, now the Philistines will come down against us. I've not asked for the favor of the Lord, so I forced myself and offered the burnt offering." And look at verse 13. Samuel said, "Saul, you have acted with initiative. Good job. You have acted creatively. You had a problem and you came up with a solution. Saul, you've acted foolishly. You've acted foolishly." Saul seemed to have everything in order after all, and he certainly had a long list of seemingly legitimate excuses prepared for Samuel. And yet it was a grievous error in judgment by disregarding God's revealed will, what God actually said about the kinds of sacrifices to be offered and who was to offer them. So not only has God revealed in the law, this is how you do sacrifices, and these are the sacrifices that you do, and here's who does it. Not only can you read Leviticus, and listen, did he have any excuse like, well, Leviticus was really vague? Like, dude, you've read Leviticus sometime, right? It's not a vague book. So not only did he have God's revealed will about all these sacrifices, but he also had a promise from Samuel. Samuel said, "I will be there. Trust me." And instead of giving him the full amount of time, 7 days, it was the seventh day. And right about the time that Samuel would have arrived, Saul starts questioning. He questions the prophet's commitment. He questions whether he'll be there. And so he forces himself and he does it. Both of these examples, including Jude as well, illustrate what happens when we make decisions in life, both like practical daily life decisions as well as decisions of a more substantial faith nature. It shows what happens when we make decisions impetuously. We rush in, like the old saying goes, and we bring destruction upon ourselves and destruction upon those around us. Have I done the same things in my own life? What does it look like when fools rush in where angels fear to tread? Here's some examples. And these are certainly, listen, if you think that the thing from Korah's time, well, that was a long time ago. If you think Saul and Samuel, well, that was a long time. I'm not offering sacrifice. I'm not going to battle. What does any of this have to do with me and just kind of my normal life? Okay. Do I rush to judgments when I get offended by something? When you say something and my initial reaction is offense, what do I do with that? What am I going to do with that? Do I assume the best about you? And, well, maybe I misheard him, or maybe he doesn't understand, or maybe I really am wrong about that, and I'm glad that he called me out for it. Or do I assume that you're just being a knucklehead and you don't get me? Okay. Do I stretch Bible verses to fit some kind of agenda? Do I really want something to be true? I really want something to be right. I really want it. I want the Bible to say what I want it to say to prove that I'm right about something. And I find a Bible verse that, like, okay, if I take one translation and rearrange the words and then say that the Greek definition means this, and then I twist it and avoid context and avoid the history behind it, there, I've got a Bible verse that proves I'm right about something. Okay, do I jump in and out of relationships for dumb reasons? Or do I try to stay committed to people? Now, obviously, I'm not saying date people who are wrong for you or something like that. That's not what I'm saying, but we have to ask ourselves, like when it comes to friendships, not just romantic relationships, but friendships as well. Am I the sort of person that just kind of like drops friends for no reason at all? And do I make excuses for why I drop friends? Do I just start ignoring people, ghosting people, never answering texts or never answering phone calls, and I've just like found a reason to stop doing that? Do I assume the worst when I hear gossip about other people? The book of Proverbs talks about gossip like it's a dainty morsel. I've always loved that, by the way. It's New American Standard. Dainty morsels. Ooh, they go down deep, don't they? But am I more excited about the dainty morsel that I just came across? Or do I stop people dead in their tracks and say, that sounds an awful lot like gossip. That's got the flavor of gossip. What are the little cakes called? Patty choux, is that what they're called? Something like that? Am I wrong about that? Amy knows what I'm talking about. The little tiny cute cakes, right? The little tiny cakes, the little birthday cakes. Yeah, okay, there you go. Petit fours, right? Something like that. I watched the Food Network one time, so I'm an expert on this. Fools rush in and start using words that they don't know what they mean. Dainty morsels. Go backward a little bit. Reverse, reverse, reverse. What do I do with gossip, though, when I hear it? What do I do with it? I got to stop people dead in their tracks and say, that sounds an awful lot like gossip. I'm going to need some facts on that. I need you to go talk to that person face to face before you think you can talk to me. Do I push for a quick victory in an argument? I remember there was a preacher friend of mine who was talking about the biggest mistake that he made in evangelism was he was having an argument or a debate, we'll say, a debate with somebody about some kind of doctrinal issue. And he pulled the absolute fast, I'm going to destroy this thing in a moment. I'm going to tear this thing apart. And he instantly, boom, 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 proved it wrong. End of argument. And he was right about it. In fairness, he was right. His position was the position I would take on it. And he was right. And he absolutely just obliterated this person. And he said, I realized afterward, when that person would never talk to me again, that I actually lost that day. Do I push for my agenda in Bible class? Am I one of those people in Bible class where the teacher's going along trying to be productive, trying to get things done, and I've always got this hobby topic that I'm always going to try and bring my hobby topic back around? While we're on the subject of that, let me bring up something that's completely unrelated. Do I rush through worship? When the point of worship, like 1 Corinthians 11 says, is to slow down and examine yourselves. And whoever examines himself and is not worthy is going to bring judgment upon himself. You realize that not just the superficial manner of our worship, but the heart and motive behind our worship is being judged by God. You realize our worship is being judged by God. And if we're just rushing through it, I got to do the 5 acts of worship. Check, 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 check. There, done. We did it. Now get to lunch before the Baptists do. And you realize your motive is being judged by God. And you're just rushing through it. Do I accuse God before I see the outcome of something? God, I prayed for this and you didn't do it. Where are you, God? What are you doing? Sitting on your hands, hands in your pocket? Where are you when I need you, God? When, as it turns out, maybe a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years later, God was actually working in his providence to bring about an even better outcome than you ever could have imagined. But you just rushed into judgment because today you didn't get what you wanted when you prayed about something. Do I declare victory or defeat while there's still time left on the clock? And forgive the basketball or the football terminology there, but listen, sports terminology works when it does. But it's almost like when it's 2 minutes left on the clock and you're down by a touchdown and you just look at it and go, well, that's it, game over, and I get up and walk out of the room in frustration. Do we do the same thing with spiritual things? Do we give up on our kids because they're going through a little rebellious phase? Do we give up on our spouse because the love has gotten a little bit cold? Do we give up on the church because it's hit a rough patch? Do we give up when there's still time left on the clock? And that's why patience is the antidote for this. That's why patience is the answer. It's important to remember the role that patience plays, and the scriptures bear this out. Patience is connected with love in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. Patience is connected with our speech and our anger in James 1 and verse 19. Don't just rush into anger. Don't just rush into having an answer for everything. But listen first and be slow to speech and slow to anger. Patience is connected with our treatment of each other in Ephesians 4 and verse 2, that if you want to have unity in the church, the path to unity is at least partly found in the kind of patience and forbearance that we have with each other. Patience needs to be applied to our teaching of other people in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 2. Patience needs to be applied in our suffering in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 20. Look at the way that Peter puts it here. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, and you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. Or our attitude toward the coming of the Lord in James 5, verses 7 and 8. Remember what is said in Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 8. The writer summed it up well when he said, patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Well, I'll give you one last point to think about, and the lesson will be yours. What about courage? Right? The impetuous person may come in and say, what you call fools rushing in, what you call being impetuous, I just call courage. Now, is courage just a euphemism for fools rushing in where angels fear to tread? A nice term that we can apply to our own impetuous actions, where we rush to judgments and rush to conclusions and rush to bring a matter to an end before it truly should. Well, I like a good passage in Joshua chapter 1. And listen, if you can find a guy in the Bible more courageous than Joshua, aside from Jesus himself, boy, I'd like to find out who that is. Joshua was an incredibly courageous person. And yet Joshua himself said in Joshua 1 verse 7, only be strong and courageous. Be careful, he says, to do everything according to the law. I believe there it was actually God. In chapter 1 and verse 1 of Joshua, it says, at the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua. So I want to be careful that we're saying who it is there. But God says you can be courageous and also careful at the same time. You can be courageous, but make sure that your courage is being hemmed in by what the law of God actually says. I think we mistakenly assume that courage is always a good thing, even if it is divorced from patience and caution. People will say sometimes you have to run before you can walk, or shoot first and ask questions later. Bullheadedness is a common trait of our some of our heroes at least. And yet one of our greatest heroes ever, Joshua, who was a man of renown and bravery in battle, believed that courage and caution went hand in hand. We'll bring our lesson to a close on that point. I want to encourage you that if you're not a Christian here this morning, listen, maybe the most courageous thing that you're ever going to do with your life is to finally confess your belief in Jesus Christ as the Son of God. To leave a life of sin behind and to be baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Because maybe you've got a lot of obstacles that you've had to overcome in life, spiritually, morally, physically. Maybe you've got family that's hostile to this whole religion and faith thing. And that by becoming a Christian, you may lose friends, you may lose people who are close to you, you may lose a support system. You may, as the disciples of Jesus pointed out, you may have to give up houses and farms and family in order to be disciples of Jesus Christ. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. But Jesus promises that when you give up everything for me, you're going to get 100 times that in the kingdom. So fools rush in where angels fear to tread, but that is not the case when it comes to obeying the gospel. God is asking you, God is laying the path out before you clearly, simply, plainly, beautifully, saying, you'd have to be a fool not to rush in to what I'm offering you. So if you have any spiritual need at all that we can help you with today, please let that need be known by coming forward as we stand and sing.